What we're going to do now is we're going to have a panel, which is going to be, is going to involve Joe and Steve, who we both just heard from. But we've also got Edmund King, who's the president of the AA, who I'm sure needs little introduction, and also Helen Wells. Lots of people have referred to Helen's work. We refer to her work in our report as well. Helen is Dr. Helen Wells is at Keele University and is director of the Roads Policing Academic Network. And this panel is going to be chaired by Nick Gargan, who is an independent policing consultant and long-time friend and supporter of the Police Foundation, who's worked with us extensively on this report. So I'll hand over to Nick to chair this session.
Thank you very much indeed, Rick, and thanks everybody for what's been a brilliant session so far this morning. You seldom see the chat as busy as it's been down the side of here, and so many really engaged people. What I'm proposing to do is to put Helen and Edmund on notice. In a couple of moments, I'm going to ask each of you to give just a couple of moments your reflections on what you've heard this morning and on the report. And specifically, Helen, I'm hoping that you'll give us your thoughts on, is this really roads policing's moment in the sun? You've been around this sector for a while. Do you see green shoots and signs of positive change about the prominence of roads policing? And Edmund, I'll then come to you, and I'm going to be asking you, I'm just giving you some thinking time here. As a leading expert and campaigner in this space, do you like what you're hearing from the police, and do you think what's shaping up from the police is what's required? But before I do that, just a couple of words on the recommendations, and particularly there's been a lot of chat about recommendation number 5. And to give you a sense of the origin of that, first and foremost, when the roundtable took place that was heavily influential in this report, and then subsequently when we came together to discuss what the recommendations might be, there was a real powerful sense in the room of people, the virtual online room, of people looking around and saying, we haven't talked before, and we should, and I'm learning things from you that would be really good, and industry hasn't perhaps had the say that it might have done, and other parts of the ecosystem haven't been getting together to the extent that they could. Steve just talked about data, of course, but there's the potential to bring together everybody's data. And then the second part of that proposal was really inspired by Commander Kyle Gordon from the Met, who I had a conversation with just before Christmas, along with Andy Cox from Lincolnshire. And Kyle was talking about where's the body that's looking 5 and 10 years down the road in this environment where we're seeing rapid developments that have been alluded to this morning, and the recommendation about some kind of forum was deliberately not specific, and I've seen down, and prescriptive. I've seen down the chat this morning, it's been described as a think tank, it's been allied to the potential collision investigation branch. There's flexibility about what it might be, but the review thought that actually something that is informed by science, forward-looking, broadly collaborative, had real potential to add value to the existing bodies and structures. So that's a little bit of context to that. As promised, Helen, what do you make of it all, and is this the moment in the sun for roads policing?
Thanks, Nick. Well, I'm rather a cynical person, generally speaking, but I'm finding it very exciting at the moment. I really do think this is a watershed moment. It's been described as lots of different things, but watershed is the word I've written down. And from the chat, there is some discussion about the right way to take all this forward. And I think what we need to focus on is that not falling out about the details, getting the details right, but acknowledging the consistency across the recommendations from all this great work that's been going on across the HMI CFRS, the PACT report, this report, the Roads Policing Review, etc. We've never had so much attention, certainly not in the 27 years that I've been working in this business. Thanks, Nick, for saying I've been around the game for quite a while. Of course, if I was in the police, I'd be talking about how many years to retirement, but sadly I'm not. So, I have been around doing this kind of work for a long time, and we've never had the attention that we've got now. We need to make the most of that. We need to look for the consistencies across those recommendations. My own work was looked at for a long time as, you know, really niche. I wasn't doing any harm, let her crack on with it. She's still banging on about drivers and speed cameras and stuff. And I think it was, you know, a bit of a joke probably. And I'm sure for a lot of us, we did wonder if we were ever going to get the platform to make these very important points. And we hear, I think we've heard for years, politicians talking about five deaths a day, but we've got a great safety record. So really kind of saying, you know, yes, some people are dying, but there's more people dying elsewhere. So let's focus on the really important issues. And I think it's great that those conversations are not happening as regularly as they were. So yes, I think it's a watershed moment. I think it's a lot of that is down to leadership, and very many of the people on this call at the moment can take credit for that. There's so much energy, as I think it was Steve described, and a real, I think, willingness for to listen to the voices out in the public that are demanding roads policing, that are endorsing what we're doing, that are saying it's legitimate, that are clamouring for things like community speed watch, that are submitting their dash cam footage. And I think it's the willingness to listen to those voices and to argue for them, and not to listen to the minority, I think, probably, of really loud, angry voices who think it's all about persecution, who think it's the war on the motorist. And just to sort of finish off my little bit here, I think if we think about the Panorama programme on roads policing that was on a couple of weeks ago, I think there was a lot wrong with that. I think the one sort of source of blame, the person that escaped blame really was the driver. But I think we need to focus on the positives of that also, in that we were on the agenda. And the tone, the narrative of that piece was not, why are there so many speed cameras? Why are you doing us all for just 35 and a 30? The tone had reversed, and the tone was, why are you not doing more? Why are the cameras switched off? Not why are the cameras switched on? And I think we need to take the silver linings from what was, you know, I think a pretty largely quite poor programme. But I think that's evidence of that tide turning, which means that, yeah, this is our moment.
Fantastic, very, very upbeat note. Just before I go to Edmund, I notice in the chat that Tracy Catling has been very circumspect, very discreet about what she can say, but there's clearance, there's advice gone into ministers, including contributions from NPCC, about this question of roads policing and the strategic policing requirement, and obviously being very careful about and very guarded, she nevertheless gives us some cause for hope there, which I think is a positive development. Edmund, I can't see you. I hope you're there, and I hope you can remember the question, because it's so long since I asked it.
Yes, I am here. Can you see me, hear me?
I can certainly hear you, Edmund, yes.
Oh, good.
And see you.
Good. Okay, well, firstly, you know, great report, support all the recommendations, and it's something at the AA we've been talking about for a long time. You know, one of my sound bites for 20 years has been, we need more cops in cars, we need more cops on cycles. It is crucial. And I think the thing I would add in terms of campaigning and effective campaigns, and it goes beyond DFT working with the Home Office, this really, as Joe Shiner said, you know, 5 people dying on the roads every day is more than a critical incident. We need leadership from the very top. We need the Prime Minister to embrace these issues. There has not been one Prime Minister in the last 30 years since I've been working in this area that really has taken it seriously. And when you look at other countries like France and Norway, the leadership has come from the top. If we had 5 deaths, you know, on the railways, if we had 5 deaths in the House of Commons every day, there would be public inquiries, there would be outrage. But we let people get away with this. And yes, talk to the victims. We ran a campaign, Caitlin's Hour, last year, and it was so moving having to talk to Caitlin's mother, Sharon Huddleston, having to call her up and ask, if we could use Caitlin in our campaign to get messages across to new drivers, you know, and I couldn't bear it. She was talking about Caitlin going to her first concert. My daughter had just gone to Reading, which Caitlin was never able to do. My daughter had just started to learn to drive. Caitlin had started to learn to drive. These are real people in the real world. And this is why we need leadership from the top. You know, yes, we can campaign. There are things we need. Drivers must take a responsibility. And the war on the motorist stuff is garbage, because whenever at the AA, we actually poll drivers, and for the last decade, more than 80% support the use of speed cameras. 95% would recommend speed awareness courses. Drivers actually would like to see, generally, more cops on the road. So, you know, this minority thing about cash cows really enrages me as a representative, you know, of 20 odd million drivers. So, you know, I agree with the recommendations, but I would like to see the priority level go up 3 notches, and then I think together we can really make a difference.
Brilliant, thank you. Ladies and gents, I noticed where we are comment heavy but question light in the chat. We've all become expert with the use of Teams over the last couple of years. If you have a question, then please raise your hand or just type it into the chat. Before as we wait for that to happen, Edmund, Rick talked about thinking in a systemic way and that kind of whole system approach. Are you optimistic? How far off that are we?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it is relevant. You know, we do need 5-star drivers, so we need better driver education, we need better driver training, we need drivers to revisit their training, which, you know, I know is some of the things that Drive Tech do, but 5-star drivers really important. And, you know, these points about speeding and the highway code and all this nonsense that the media has speculated about drivers against cyclists. You know, we are the same people. I've got a cycle over here, I've got an electric car over there, I've got 2 legs, I also walk. You know, it is nonsense. I'm not at war with myself. So 5-star drivers, we need to work a lot on that. We need to work a lot on attitudes. And yes, 5-star cars, Euro NCAP, without a doubt, has been a game changer. Our cars are much safer, but probably more safe for the occupants than people outside. Yes, we've got collision protection, but yeah, there's more that we can do there, but also we shouldn't be over reliant on the technology. And also 5-star roads. We do need to look at the road system, and sometimes it is small things like white lines down the middle of the road. You know, it doesn't have to be major bypasses or major rebuilds. There are still junctions that I go past on dual carriageways. Went to Norwich last night. There are still places on the A11 where cars can cut across. It is crazy in this day and age that we haven't designed out those things. So yes, it has to be a concerted effort across all those areas. But I think the things in the report, for example, the strategic policing requirement, Vision Zero, and all of those would help with the broader picture.
And of course, what you've described there calls on that kind of multi-ministry effort that really does require, you know, 10 Downing Street level of coordination and engagement, doesn't it? Very good question from Sergeant Dan Pascoe from Surrey here. We're talking about the input end, about enforcement, but what can be done about the significant challenges and about the lack of court slots available to prosecute bad drivers? A huge national issue which predates COVID by some margin, but does result in drivers avoiding prosecution. Is that on your radar, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great to hear from Dan, because he's obviously Surrey and Sussex have collaborated, and he constantly keeps me on my toes in a really helpful way. around asking really difficult questions that often don't have the answer for. So I think there is an issue with court slots, but then I think this is also about us thinking differently, because I think that there is a number of offences that are committed on our roads that don't have to go to court but can still be equally penalising if that's the right road to go down. And we must also remember that whole education bit and making sure that we have got the right disposal for what's being committed. But I'll give you an example that where we may report people to court and where there may be offences that need to go to court, if we had the ability to be able to increase, as an example, this might not be the final solution, but the number of penalty points that you could perhaps add to a licence, but go about it without having to go anywhere near the courts, then there may well be an advantage to that in a much less bureaucratic way. And actually, you know, one of the ways, and I put a thing on the bar, I should have said during my speech, Dean Hatton, who is on the call, does such a huge amount of brilliant and very intelligent thinking around the portfolio. And so one of the questions is, how do you actually enforce the law, but also educate at the same time? So that sliding scale of, well, if you commit X crime on the X road crime, you're going to end up with 9 points on your licence. But if you do this educative course meaningfully, we'll reduce that by 3 or 6 or whatever that looks like. So I do think we've got to come up with a different solution that sits outside of the court process, because simply putting some of those penalties for, and I call them lower level offences, are you know, we all know that that's a difficult phrase, but doesn't change people's behaviours, arguably. Sometimes it makes them more militant on the roads.
Absolutely, I think we highlight something there. Motorists, in my experience, are really very rational in the calculations they make about the risks that they're prepared to take, and actually the effect of you know, stronger penalty, the effect of an intrusive level of punishment, you know, does absolutely have an impact on driver behaviour. I think you've also answered David Davies' question there about using tech more in disposals and penalties, and I'll perhaps come to Steve Barry on that question in a moment to see if you've experienced if that's on the agenda in the roads policing review about a greater use of technology, alcohol interlocks, mandatory speed limiters, etc., etc. But before that, Helen, you've a question from Tracy Catling talking about the lack of political will to tackle road casualties, which has been come up a couple of times today. Do you think that just reflects the public's acceptance of risks on the roads? And if so, what can be done to change it?
Yeah, I think this relates partly to what I was saying about leadership before and acknowledging concern in the public. I think there is definitely a problem. Driver psychology is a real challenge. This belief that it won't happen to me, that I think that Steve alluded to, that other people, sorry, it might be Joe, that other people's behaviour needs to change, but mine doesn't. I can handle it. All those things, which I think do come back to roads policing in the end, because by and large, yeah, drivers do think rationally. They may not be the same version of rationality that we use, but they have this weighing up of will my speeding cause me a problem or will it not? And the trouble is, the vast majority of times people break the law, they don't get caught and they don't suffer any serious consequences. They get away with it. And that, I think, encourages drivers and riders to believe that they are indeed better than average. That yes, of course, we need enforcement for everybody else and we need other people to be restricted because they put me at risk. But personally, you know, I'm not one of these statistics. So even if you do see reports of tragic deaths, it could almost reinforce this idea that, well, I speed, I use my mobile phone, and that's not me. Therefore, perhaps I am better than average. And that's I think why education is so important. And I think that there are signs that the public is much more on board with what we're doing, as I said in my previous piece. But I think education is as deterrent as part of that whole punishment system is really important for challenging those beliefs. I don't think it's easy done. And I think what we need are really smart interventions to help persuade the public, whether that's as a disposal because they've been caught or just for part of their training. And things like the interactive resources that my colleague Dr. Gemma Briggs at the OU are developing, like immersive ones where you literally feel distraction for yourself. You literally experience the consequences of being distracted for yourself mean that you can't then go, well, that's other people, because you've lived it. I don't know if that really helps answer the question. I think it does. It's all about creating that ground level shift that will actually, I think, influence the politicians.
I think that's absolutely correct, and of course the question of education and raising awareness goes well beyond, you know, formal education, and it's one thing. I'm looking around at some of the faces on this call, and you know, Edmund in particular has been raising the profile for years with the things he's done on telly and in the press. I know that in the policing sector, Charlie Norman, the Drive Tech MD, has had about a dozen articles in Policing Insight looking at different dimensions of road policing, road safety, and you know, that's how things get to the top of the agenda, isn't it? By talking about them, by highlighting issues, by stimulating a debate, and you know, that's obviously one of the reasons why this Police Foundation report is so welcome. Steve, I said I'd just come to you to ask if the question of using tech in enforcement is featuring as part of the roads policing review. Is that something that's high on the agenda?
It is very high on the agenda. I mean, the Home Office has been pushing that really hard for the last couple of years. We've actually got 8 strategic goals under the vision and mission for the road policing review, and one of them is the appropriate use of technology. And I think we discussed the word appropriate for quite a while before the board actually signed it off, because of course some people see it as a panacea for all of this, others see it as, you know, the big brother type problem, and therefore the reality is we probably need to make sure before we go down the technological route for either new problems or solving old problems in a different way, we need to think about it really, really carefully, and taking it right up to the top level. The reason you need to think about it really carefully is because it has an impact on the DFT, it has an impact on the Home Office, and it has an impact on the Ministry of Justice. And the reality is, you know, trying to get 3 government departments to agree, well, what's the right use of technology for an enforcement perspective takes time. So yes, it's high on the agenda. You know, we have people like Dr. Helen Wells who really help inform the debate around what is appropriate. So is it automation of process? Is it cameras? Is it solving the new problems of driver-assisted vehicles? You know, we need to think about all of that really, really carefully. But in summary, the answer to the question is, when the road policing review finishes, because it's a review, so it won't go on forever, we need to evolve it into something that is business as usual. And I do sound a little bit like a broken record when I say, again, we need national level singular strategic decision making, and what's lacking at the moment is national level singular decision making around, well, what's appropriate use of technology? Because what happens is you'll get really good, motivated, committed, funded people locally using technology in innovative ways, and you know, it might grab the headlines, but it isn't necessarily evidence-based. You haven't necessarily proved the concepts, and you haven't necessarily thought about where does it fit into the safe systems approach. All of that needs to be done before a national entity of some description can say this is how we should do that. So yes is the overall answer, but as ever, it's complicated.
And I think it's quite interesting that there are challenges in both ways about, you know, taking local good practice to national implementation. On the one hand, you know, what's the validation, and how are we sure that what felt like brilliant innovation in, you know, West Lincolnshire actually does deserve its rapid rollout? But by the same token, and I know this is a big issue to Lord Nick Herbert at the College of Policing, sometimes the speed of getting, you know, best practice, new ideas, innovation of the highest quality out there is not as quick as it needs to be. Rick, I see a question here about health, and I'm going to ask you the question because I think this features not just in terms of this review, but more broadly in the strategic review of policing. And the question from Martin Evans is, any thoughts on how we get health involved in helping change behaviours of drivers in the same way that the public health approach to gang and youth violence was suggested and pursued? And I'm just wondering, not simply focusing on the work that you and Ruth have done on this report, but more broadly, is there scope for greater engagement with health, and how's it going, and what's the key to unlocking that engagement?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think there is a really important role, and quite obviously you can see the we know, for example, where with knife crime, there's a lot of work that goes on in hospitals where with victims of stabbings and so on, where they're trying to do a lot of use these as teachable moments, particularly where you might have a victim who's also a suspect and sort of involved in crime, and trying to use the moment after an incident to sort of capitalise on that as a teachable moment. I think there's so that there's work going on there where police and health are working together, and I think you could see that in this space as well. And I think it is difficult. I mean, I think colleagues will know. I think one of the most challenging spaces is the interface between health and policing, because there are challenges around. They're both very frenetic services which are very busy. They're often dealing with emergencies in the here and now. And so there's often a reluctance to share data, which people will be familiar with. But I think but these are things which can be tackled. And in our report on. In our wider strategic review report, which, as I said, is published on the 8th of March, we talk about what needs to happen locally to facilitate more collaboration between health, policing, local government, and we talk about all the different barriers that currently exist to that collaboration and how they can be removed. And at a general level, I think there is a pathway there to doing it. It's hard and it's complicated. There are governance issues, there are data issues. There are professional culture issues, but I think that if we recognise all of those barriers and we have a kind of place-based kind of focus on overcoming them, then there are good examples of people doing that. So yeah, I think there is a way forward there, and I could see in this space that could be potentially quite powerful.
Thank you. I've been noticing down the chat on the right. I'm multitasking away here, and down the chat on the right, there's been a lot of contributions, really interesting contributions from Rudy Hospital from the French Embassy, and I think Rudy, you must be a member of the Gendarmerie Nationale. If you're prepared to just give us a flavour of how this all sounds to somebody with a different international perspective, and is there anything we're missing? Is there learning that we could be having from the overall system in France and the Gendarmerie Nationale in particular? Do stick your hand up in the chat. I've checked the hand up. Sorry, in the at the top of the screen. I've checked that that's working because it's been so quiet. Oh, here we are. Rudy, over to you. What are we missing?
Oh, I didn't plan this contribution, but thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So honored to be called here. I will never indeed give you advice of what you missed or what you should do. That would be to be too French. Talking to a British indeed. but to be fair with you and up front, I'm very glad to be here, because I planned actually to set up a bilateral seminar at the end of this semester between the French and the British, maybe to talk about this issue. As I said on the chat, the gendarmerie is policing 95% of the roads outside the urban areas. And it's very clear, it became very clear 15 years ago that on the roads, you've got road policing and crimes driving cars, but also it's an area where you've got a lot of criminals doing their crime with their cars. So controlling the roads is not only about saving lives on the roads, but also to tackle crime. But the flip side of that, as I said, is that you can create a fear, and I know that you in the UK are sometimes saying that the French are policing people by force instead of by consent, which I would probably disagree indeed, especially in the gendarmerie, as we are in the community among people. But it's true in a way that you can become a toxic presence on the road, because people will instrumentalize you, saying to the kids outside, or behave, because otherwise the officer will tell you off and will be fined. And then in your psyche as a child, you will keep in mind that the officer you will cross on the road is somebody against you and not with you as a friend to tackle the problems in your community. So we need to make sure that we're not focusing only on road policing, but having an overview of what is it to be stopped by an officer on the road, and not undermine our cooperation with the community. And the second thing I would stop here, is that with all these speed cameras that we not have in our hands, people can be upset against the police, even if the cameras are not in the hands of the police, and now they are not at the right place at the right time, etc., because it's not always based on science and collisions. And in the end, you would have a lot of people losing their licenses, and sometimes poor people losing their licenses, and they leave away from their work because they can't afford to live close to their work. So you would end up with people driving their car because they can't afford to stop driving to their work without license. If they don't have a license, they will stop having an insurance. And in the end, when they cross an officer stopping them, what they do is that they speed up. And I've been nearly killed as a BCU commander on the police checkpoint because the person was drunk but also have no license and didn't want to stop. So you can lose an officer on that. So there's a flip side and a very thin line to be found on tackling crime on the road, which is obvious, and I've announced death to families, so I know what it means, but also to try to find the right balance with other part of policing. This is what I would say.
Thank you very much indeed, and I see you've had some endorsement in there, not least from Joe Shiner, and this concept of changing minds. There's a question questions a little bit like buses, aren't they? You hang around for one for ages, and then suddenly you get a glut of them coming along at once. The one that I don't want to lose, that was asked a few minutes ago from Andrew Morley, was about the question of deferred sanctions outside of speed awareness courses. So Dubai Police ran a pilot scheme in which a traffic fine was discounted for every 3 months that a driver didn't commit an additional violation up to 12 months later. And apparently there was some success of that with younger drivers. I guess it goes to the point about people being quite calculating. Joe, is that something that's on the agenda?
Yeah, I think there is an increasing amount of debate and discussion around let's almost have a bit of a blank canvas towards this, because we know that some of what we're doing isn't working. So why would we keep doing the same? And actually, I think as society changes, as our roads change, as the transport changes, all of the technology we talk about, we should surely quite dynamically be looking at actually what the right outcomes, penalties, education, whatever that looks like, to persuade people to change their mind and change their behaviours. Now, whether it's the difference between points, between fines, between the seizure of their vehicles, whatever that looks like, I think there is almost an opportunity for us going forwards to say, how do we have a bit of a blank canvas around this and try to achieve what we need to in 5 years' time. And there is another question, and I apologise because I'm going to have to leave after this because I've got to dial into to another meeting at 5:02. But there was another question earlier on the bar around electric scooters and around how and should we actually introduce almost a course at the moment around the responsible use of electric scooters. Now, there is a part of me that says, and again, I'll refer to Brighton because Brighton seems to be, like everybody uses them there. There is a part of me that says we almost would reduce the number of collisions and injuries that are caused by them, and they are, and the antisocial behaviour there, by introducing a course. But of course, what we can't do is to effectively endorse illegality, and they are illegal. So we have this very strange situation at the moment where we could probably prevent serious injuries, deaths in some cases, by introducing some prevention, some education, but by doing that we would be accepting and endorsing illegality. So again, I think we've got to move quicker in this arena. We've got to be more dynamic. We've got to just move quicker to address some of these things that are coming into this space.
And I think, that how it's a really good example of where this body described in recommendation 5, it's not a standing army, but it's a coordinating group that can bring together. I think it was Colin Patterson who asked the question, and I don't think anybody knows more about e-scooters than Colin does. But here's the kind of technical challenge of e-scooters. You're talking there about the practical challenges of enforcement. We've got Tracy on the call, who's actually got access to ministers who can do things about this. We can turn to the likes of Helen, who can, look elsewhere and tell us what the research, what research tells us what are likely to be the most promising approaches, and plenty of expertise on the call. Slightly underrepresented in terms of the third sector and all the knowledge that they can bring to bear on this. I think that's really the sort of the big learning from this whole exercise is improving that collaboration, but collaborating at speed and at pace and informed by data. You've got to go, haven't you?
I have got to go, but I do just want to say one thing, because what I wouldn't want is for anybody on this call to have an impression that there isn't a huge amount of synergy in working together with people like Tracy. I know Glyn's on the call and others that are on this call, because it's the one arena of policing that since July I have felt that there is a real common urge and want to make things better. And I haven't come across anybody who has been a barrier, an obstacle, a naysayer, or tried to kind of sideline any of the work that we're all collectively, ethically, transparently trying to do, and I think that's really important, and I think that gives this real energy, power, and sort of hope for the future as well. But I am going to have to go now, but I just think it's really important we recognise that spirit of working together that currently exists hugely across everybody.
I think that's brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your contributions, Joe. I think the other message is that industry wants to be part of that too, but I think this conversation has been great. Thank you so much for your contribution. We're running out of time. I think it would be churlish not to acknowledge a bit of stylish French from Steve Barry in the chat there, with his offer to learn more about the summit from Rudy. Very, very stylish indeed. As we run out of time for the panel session, I'm just going to ask Steve, Edmund and Helen, just for your closing reflections on the panel session we've had on what you'd like to see as next steps. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably more of what I've already said. I mean, one of the things I live by is not to regret when I'm old and grey and looking back on my life, making more of a fuss about the things that were important. So I really don't want to be looking back and thinking, I should have made a bit more fuss about the Road Police Review and the recommendations in it and the Police Foundation report and the HMIC recommendations. I think it's all there. And I think a few of the comments have articulated it probably better than I, which is it now comes down to political will. So there's only so much we can do. We now need the political will. That would be my final passing shot.
Brilliant. And actually, the fact is, it's the squeaking hinge that gets the oil, as we all know. And, political will is influenced by how much people like us have to say on issues like these. And that doesn't mean it's a recipe for being ranty, but, conversation and interaction and education in its broadest sense does influence people. I still remember and carry around in my head the phrase you used. I don't remember it exactly, but in the first workshop when you talked about the collective acceptance of what's acceptable, or the collective
groupthink, national groupthink
of what's acceptable. It's just getting those points across and making them persistently, calmly, and publicly that shifts opinions. Edmund.
Yeah, I would like to add one relatively simple line, and it is referred to in the report, and that's around no matter what the punishments and stricter punishments, etc., all our surveys show that more people believe it's easier to get away with motoring offences because there is less of a presence of police out there. And I do think that's quite important as a simple step. 4 in 10 think they won't be caught for using a mobile phone. They won't be stopped for drink driving and other serious offences. So I do sometimes think just that presence of having someone in a cop car, someone in the town, community police, whatever, can make that psychological difference, and that's something we've lost quite a bit in the last 15 or 20 years.
Thank you very much. And Helen?
Yeah, I think just to follow on from Edmund's point as well. I mean, as Steve says, political will is really important, but I want us to think a little bit, I think, about supposing this all happens and this all comes to fruition. I think we need to keep focused on the roads policing officers themselves as well, a bit more. I think there's issues around training with the PEQF, the degree apprenticeship scheme, and whether that's training the officers that we want to see delivering what we're talking about at the front line. I think there are huge issues around officer wellbeing as well, which are a consequence partly of the reduction in roads policing officers and the fact that they just, as it says in the report, go from job to job. So I think, and also their willingness and ability to take on board the data insights that we're talking about generating. You know, it's not a simple process of creating data insights, cops do something with them. So I think my argument would be that, you know, hopefully we'll get all the political stuff in place at the high level, and then let's make sure we're focused on the people. We're hoping that we'll operationalise all this.
Thank you very much indeed. Listen, it's time to pull the panel to a close. I'm a couple of minutes late, but it's a shame. I do think before we opened up the call, Steve Barry was suggesting if need be he was free to stay on this call till 4 o'clock, and at the time I thought that'd be too much, but actually, because of what we've heard, I think we could have gone on for ages more. It's been absolutely fascinating. I think Ruth has done a super job with the report, and I think, you know, what we now have is a really meaningful report with helpful recommendations. It's another brick in the wall of, you know, trying to build something and exploit the moment in the sun that Helen is optimistic about. Sorry for everybody whose questions didn't get aired, but I hope you'll agree that the panel's done a brilliant job, and the Police Foundation have done a super job this morning. I think our job now is, if you haven't read the report, which you probably haven't because it's only just been released, but do read it, do have a look at it. And let's work together to get those recommendations implemented. And I know Charlie said at the outset that DriveTech is very keen to help, in particular with recommendation 5. And I think if we could do something about that, I think we'd be doing a really strategically sensible and important thing. Rick, back over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. And it's just to say very many thanks for attending today. It's been a great session, lots of energy. I mean, the chat has been kind of buzzing. It's great to have, you know, 60-70 people all getting together to discuss this theme, which I think shows the level of interest and engagement around it. I mean, the 3 things from the report that I just want to sort of leave people with before we go is, you know, the report is essentially saying we need prioritisation. Absolutely, this needs to be a priority. We need to be strategic. In other words, we need to do all we can to build a safer system. But most of all, we need ambition, which is the Vision Zero point. But it's Edmund's point about leadership. You know, we really need the ambition now to make a difference. And I think the level of engagement we've had today is evidence that there is, you know, there's a real willingness to be ambitious. And I think if we can keep pushing, then hopefully we'll get the political engagement that we need. We at the Foundation are really keen to stay involved in this and to continue to make a contribution. I know DriveTech are as well, and I want to thank them for their support with this project. If you want to see the report, it's on the Police Foundation website. We've put it in the chat, but it's also on our website. There'll be an article in Policing Insight going up very soon as well by me. And as I say, do let us know what you think, and you know, hopefully we can stay engaged and keep the conversation going. But thank you all very much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to DriveTech. Thank you all for attending today. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Well done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, then.